So my name is Kelsey Hoie Ferrell. I'm the Director of CARE, that's Campus Advocacy Resources and Education on UC Santa Cruz campus, and we do both prevention education and advocacy services for folks who've been impacted by sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking in the campus community.
My name is Hinck, and I'm the response team coordinator in the Title IX office, also at UC Santa Cruz. And we do prevention and response to any kind of sexual violence or sexual harassment, and that could look like alternative resolutions, which is anything not a formal investigation, or it could be a formal investigation. And then also a big part is just receiving the reports and sharing resources and information, including about CARE, so that people can have information if they, whether they choose to come to Title IX or not.
So today we're talking about affirmative consent, which has a big impact on both of our work on campus, as well as really the work of ending sexual violence in our community. So we wanted to ask of you, what brought you to this session? What interested you in being in this room with us today? Besides support for Laura.
We were talking, we're both on the board of Walton Avenue, and I don't have a lot of visibility into this particular discussion. I just think it's been it's not the rise, but more legible. So I'm just curious to kind of get arms around kind of understanding.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
And I have 3 boys, 8, 12, and 14. And my 14-year-old was saying to me just last week that, because I said, what do you know about consent? And he said, well, we first learned about it in 5th grade, and we covered it again in middle school. And I'm sure he's just started a freshman at Santa Cruz High, so I'm sure we'll be talking about it again. So I was like, I'm really happy that you're hearing about it. So I was interested in what was going on at the college level.
Yeah, so both of those comments are interesting, because for me, when I was thinking about putting this workshop together, it really came from, we do this work on campus a lot, and young people, I think, get it in some ways sometimes that we don't. And when I talk to my family especially, there are a lot of questions that come up about, like, how practical is it to actually have affirmative consent? Like, are people actually saying these things in the bedroom? And so giving us an opportunity to unpack some of that in this room today. Yeah?
I came because I came across these stickers. They say, I love fries, and FRIES is an acronym for consent that is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. And then I was giving them out, and I thought they were excellent, and that this is a wonderful topic to.
Cool. Yeah, we'll get into what all of that means too. I definitely like the acronym. All right. So to start today, I want to talk a little bit about the history. And traditionally, we have thought of consent as no means no. This was sort of the verbiage that we had around consent and traditionally. And we've thought of consent as, or lack of consent rather, as someone fighting off an attacker. So we have a myth of a rapist and a creeper man who jumps out of the bushes and naps people, right, in the dark. But what we really know about sexual assault is that 85 to 90% of sexual assaults are happening by someone who's known to the victim. These are not strangers in the bushes, they're friends, family members, partners, acquaintances, classmates. And so that the dynamics of those relationships can kind of complicate the traditional fight or flight responses that people might have when they're under stress. So we talk about fight or flight a lot. I think probably everybody is pretty familiar with those terms, but how many people have heard of a freeze response? Okay, so like half of the room. How many have heard of an appease response? 3. Okay. So these are actually other responses that are really common. So fight is a natural response where your reptilian brain, all of these responses, your reptilian brain is kicking into action and saying there's a stressor, there's something going on, and I'm going to either fight it and try and overpower the stressor to save myself, or I'm going to run away. But freeze response is also known as a form of tonic immobility. And a recent study in Sweden showed that 70% of survivors of sexual assault experience some level of tonic immobility. So they're freezing. They're saying, I wasn't able to move.
Let's check out the iTunes store.
Whew. Okay, Siri. So we get responses like, I couldn't move. I wasn't in control. I couldn't do anything. I just stood there. I just laid there. And that's happening in 70% of the cases where people are experiencing this kind of violence. Appeasing. So when we freeze, that's also our reptilian brain saying, maybe the safest option is for me to not do anything, to get through this with the least amount of harm, right? Fighting back or running away, our brain is acknowledging that maybe that's not the best option. We also see an appease response. We're helping the aggressor to get through an action might be the best option for someone to reduce harm. And they can do that consciously or unconsciously. I think of the example of this is when we've had talk in the past about women wearing pants that were too tight, and it couldn't have been rape because she had to have helped her aggressor get the pants off because they were so tight. And so that would be an appease response where it might have saved her life to help get through that with the least amount of harm.
How many of you know about that story from Denim Day? So that's one of the reasons for the origins of Denim Day is the young woman, the decision was made that exactly what she just described in Italy, and they overturned a case and said it couldn't have been rape for that reason. And it created all of the senators or the people in Congress to wear denim that day as a symbolic, protest, basically. And now it's international.
But that shows up in a lot of cases and a lot of the people that I've worked with. And then that brings up a lot of questions for them about what happened to them because in that moment they helped the violence. So also violence is really normalized, right? Our society really accepts a lot of forms of violence, especially violence against women. And women especially are socialized to be really agreeable. That saying no isn't something that was in my vocabulary for a long time because I was taught to be agreeable, to get along, to not be confrontational. And we teach little girls that especially. And so all of these things and others, this is a really brief synopsis, but all of these things make it really hard to say no. And to use no means no as our basis for consent. So if consent is simply the absence of a no, then there's a lot of room for assumptions, misinterpretations, and cross lines. And so we're going to talk about a case study throughout this session, and we'll go through that next. So before I pull up the case study, when you hear Netflix and chill, who thinks of that with sexual connotations? Okay, when you hear Netflix and chill, do you think of sexual connotations with that phrase, with that action of doing Netflix and chill? So you got about half of the room, right?
So this case study is based on kind of an amalgamation of some real cases that we saw in our office just to make sure we're preserving privacy and confidentiality. But we had seen people, so the story evolves where a female identified student went to care, someone to support if they want to make a report to law enforcement or Title IX. And so this student came into the office with the advocate, and she reported that she invited a friend to her dorm room to watch Netflix and chill, and he brought alcohol. They had a few drinks together, and then while they were watching the movie, he put his hand on her shoulders and on her hips. She was uncomfortable, but she didn't say anything. And when the movie ended, she said she needed to study, and she tried to walk him to the door, and he followed her to the door, but then he backed her up against the wall and tried to kiss her and touched her and eventually penetrated her. She relayed that she was really scared. She didn't say anything. He was 60 pounds heavier than her, and she froze. So unfortunately, this kind of story is really common. I actually didn't know about that terminology, Netflix and chill, until I heard about this case. And I don't think that was not her intention when she said, when they said, "You want to watch Netflix and chill?" and she said yes. She didn't realize that was basically a proposition in the mind of the other party. So anyway, we wanted to talk a little bit about how no means no or yes means yes is pertinent for this kind of conversation. When I started, actually, just to kind of give you a little bit of history of what we're seeing evolving with the college students, because that was one of the questions you said you were interested in. When I started at Monarch, I was at Monarch for almost 20 years, and then 3 years ago I started working on campus. And in doing that, I do the prevention trainings with the incoming students. I'm always curious about what their experience is. And I ask them questions in the big group of, we do trainings 300 to 400, and this year almost 1,000 at a time. And when I asked a classroom of 400 over and again 3 years ago, how many of you have heard about affirmative consent in school or with your parents? And we get 2 or 3 hands up. And now we get almost every hand going up. So one thing about the affirmative consent law that's critical is that it's creating it actually requires that middle schools and high schools actually are talking about this subject for the very first time. And so we get students coming into our campus that already know what affirmative consent means, whereas the parents may not. And then another thing is when I asked them this year, Kelsey and I were both there together, we would ask them, how many of you know someone who's experienced sexual violence, who was sexually assaulted, or with dating violence, and 80% of the students are raising their hands already. So that's coming into college. When we looked at that whole no means no thing, I feel like that perception that you need to stop someone, you need to fight back, it's changing, right? So we're starting to realize that even if you didn't fight back, it's still sexual assault. And for the first time, people are coming out and talking about it. Or maybe not the first time, obviously, it's been building over a long time. We have a couple of people here from Monarch, and I'm sure, well, maybe Walnut as well. When I started in the field 20 years ago, and women would tell me, this is the first time I ever talked about it. I was sexually assaulted when I was 12, when I was 15, and now they're talking about it. So the movement, I think, of people coming forward and talking about the impact has spurred the change in the legislation, but at the same time, the students and we're just kind of catching up with this idea and learning to talk about affirmative consent. It is still a tricky subject for students. But how do you all see what any ideas about what this case looks like? Is it surprising where you read that or see that? No. Does everyone see this as a sexual assault? Yeah? Clearly? Okay. Because we know not everybody would, but we're probably speaking to a group of people who are pretty passionate about this subject. And the student, when he came into our office, and he was asked, well, why do you think you had affirmative consent? Because they know they need to have that. His perception was, well, they invited me to come over. We were going to watch Netflix and chill. And so for them, that was clear communication. That was enough. And that's the area where people are getting hurt, where we're seeing sexual assault perpetuated, and a lot of misunderstanding. So one thing I'm hoping that you all come away with from this being here is just the role of talking to young people about what consent really looks like and what it means and why it's not so simple and why we need to actually be able to talk to people if we're going to be sexually intimate with them in more detail. Because what means yes to one person doesn't mean yes to another person. And then also just the compassion for that young woman. Maybe she didn't feel like she could say no, and she was scared, and that is a legitimate reaction. You know, that doesn't make her responsible. Okay, so then just to kind of, some of you might know these numbers. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted while they're in college. So even though we're doing training now, we're doing prevention work, we're seeing it's still happening. I want to just mention that the study doesn't actually address transgender or non-binary populations, that specific research that's attributed to college, but we do know that the levels are at least as high and possibly higher in terms of trans students, and that it's more difficult for males and more difficult for people who are trans to report generally. And then just saying that looking at more than 90% still don't report. So, and that's not to say that that's the only and the best course. Not everybody wants to report, but we do know most people do need to talk to somebody about it. They do need to get support, whether it's from friends, family, from an advocate ideally, and for some people, reporting is a good option. In our office, only with a formal investigation could there be discipline. And part of the reason why the legislation changed to make sure that campuses were addressing these issues, we're looking at crazy high numbers, and what we see is people who are being affected by sexual violence are dropping out of school. They're not comfortable in their class. They're no longer feeling safe in their dorms. Oftentimes, like we said, it's someone they know that hurt them, and they might be down the hall, or they might be in their friend group. They might even be their best friend that they've known since they started college 6 months ago, right? And they slept in the bed together, and you know, it's just these issues are so personal, and they affect your ability to be safe in school and feel comfortable and be successful. So we're tasked with trying to figure out how to at least, well, first prevent it, but then when it does happen, how can we help people get the resources they need so that they can be successful, because they have a right to get educated. They have a right to go through school and be successful in the end.
So I want to talk a little bit about how these norms are reinforced in society and culture, and what we'll call rape culture. So I've got some examples up here. Any Indiana Jones fans? This scene is particularly disturbing to me. When Indiana Jones lassos his woman who's trying to run away. And that scene is romantic. Right? We actually at CARE, we do a 90-minute lesson just on looking at media examples of rape culture and how to identify and dismantle them. Sleeping Beauty there's all sorts of problems all over Disney, but Sleeping Beauty is the creepiest movie. Right? These are messages that we're sending to young children about what romance looks like when a woman is sleeping and can't give consent. Not only sleeping, I would call her incapacitated. She's knocked out. Bloomingdale's ad that says, "Spike your best friend's eggnog when they're not looking."
Oh my God.
Cute, huh? I can do this all day. A t-shirt that says, "It's not rape, it's a snuggle with a struggle." And then this is an ad, a fashion ad, where there's a woman who is trying to get off of a bus or train, I think it's a train, with 4 men blocking her way. Really makes you want to buy that dress, huh? So this is the kind of ways that we are inundated with messages that contradict affirmative consent all over the place. We did this session a week ago, and I picked up 4 magazines at Target, and just been flipping through those 4 magazines, I could find examples of these in 4 magazines. This is the first 4 magazines I picked up from Target this week. So it's really hard for us to contradict this messaging. It's everywhere, when it's really normalized. When we don't pay attention and criticize the messages that we get in movies, in TV, in music videos and lyrics, that represent, that men are entitled to sex and that women are gatekeepers for sex. That women play hard to get and that they want to be chased. And that violence is romantic. So this is kind of the context that we work in, that we're confronting this all the time.
Do you all notice when you see these things coming up, like in media? Do you note it, or do you think we all just kind of skim over it?
A little both.
What'd you say?
A little both.
A little both.
Yeah.
Some of it's pretty subtle.
Yeah.
It just goes unnoticed, but more and more, it's easy to identify.
Yeah, I think that's good. That we are becoming more aware of it. Then, one example I give is there's any Game of Thrones fans. I say that in front of the college kids, and they're like, "We can't afford HBO." Okay, well, I'm a big fan, and there's so much sexual violence in it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to watch Game of Thrones, but it means I'm going to identify the messages that that's sending me, and I'm going to think critically about them, and I'm going to have conversations with people when those violent scenes are coming up about what that means, what kind of impact that might have on the characters if they were real, how that messaging can impact survivors who are watching that.
Yeah, my son got me into watching Game of Thrones. He just graduated from UCSC.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do definitely talk about the problems with it. And also, I mean, just over the years, like being in the snow or something, and the kids are watching TV and they're watching this cop show with all this racism. And I said, this please back off. This is just, there's so much propaganda and racist, sexist, stuff that so I think it's really important to call it out. And we see it, especially for young people, because it just goes in.
We can't ignore it. It's
and they're vulnerable to believing and thinking that's the way to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a show that's no longer on Netflix. Oh my God, now I'm forgetting the name. I'm thinking How I Met Your Mother, but that's not it. It's the one where it's the friends in the bar, and never mind. Arnie. Anyway, I'm sorry. I can't think of the name. I used to use this as an example 2 years ago and 3 years ago, and all the students would say, yeah, we watched this show. And this one character is always trying to get the young women drunk so he could go take them home and have sex with them. And in one show, he actually goes so far as to buy a van because he wants to park it right near the bar, because when that 15-minute cab drive, they were sobering up and they were changing their mind, or they weren't having sex with him. And the students were sitting, and oftentimes they'd be sitting in the room and their jaws would drop because they watched it. They'd watched this. They never identified. He's a likable character, but they never identified him as a predator because it's just so normalized that it was okay. It's like you kind of excuse them as likable, and in many ways he was. I can't think of what that movie is. It's gonna come to me later. I'm sorry. The TV show is actually.
Okay, so
Do we have sound?
I don't know. I hope so. We're gonna show you this video that that kind of breaks down consent in an interesting and simple way.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
But any initial thoughts to that perspective on consent?
It's so clear.
Yeah. Like if they don't want tea, don't give them tea. If they don't want sex, don't have sex with them.
And usually you don't try to force someone to drink tea without asking, right? It's pretty basic information. And this is what the policy and the law say. We're actually one of 3 states that has an affirmative consent law. Many campuses do, but for statewide we actually have legislation that says people need to have affirmative consent. And it's very similar to what you were talking about before. I've had people asking about the revoked part, like can you take away your permission after you've already given it? And then to just be clear, so if you're saying, yes, I want to engage in sex, you're engaging in sex, that's if someone says they take away the permission, that's moving forward, so you have to stop, but that doesn't mean that they revoke for what they already gave, if that makes sense. Because I had someone going, oh my God, well, what if someone revokes it afterwards?
Not retroactive.
Yeah, it's not retroactive revocation. Yeah. And then the thing that's critical in the legislation as well is that being intoxicated yourself is not an excuse for not getting permission, right? So we see that a lot. I mean, I think we saw that very publicly in the news. Like, I don't know what happened. It's, I don't remember things. That's not an excuse. Or even for students who were saying, I thought I had consent because they don't have really good reasoning, but it was hard to tell because I was drunk. People do use alcohol. Students are encouraged through the media, once again, to use alcohol as a social lubricant. So it's not uncommon for people to have a few drinks so that they feel comfortable and loosen up. And then, given the way that we're gendered, these kinds of problems really are more common with alcohol and drugs.
Seems to me like at UCSC, just from watching what my son had to do in order to start school, maybe there's a whole training on alcohol, so online stuff. I was looking over his shoulder, and it's 4 years ago now, but just it seemed really superficial to me. Like from the university, I would hope that there would be something that really looks at the alcohol industry, the profit, the ways that youth are targeted to drink, and the way drinking is glorified, and all those things that to look on a deeper level and not just this many drinks with on a full stomach or what I mean. I think that's something really more fundamental that that challenges capitalism and challenges profit over people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, with prevention education, multiple points of contact are best practice. And you're right, it is pretty superficial. We actually this year added for the first year we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion training as well. So we have alcohol education, sexual assault prevention, diversity training for all students, and that's online. But in addition to that, they get in-person trainings from the CARE office, from the Title IX office, from SHOP, which is Student Health Outreach and Promotion. They do some educational trainings. It's not enough. It's really not enough.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, and I would say that we have ongoing programming as well, but it's, it's really difficult to reach 17,000 people
Absolutely.
a lot of times.
Yeah, I'm not just
and-
going to complain
yeah.
because there was nothing when I was there 45 years ago. It was just like, for all, but yeah, so there's been progress.
Yeah.
Good points.
I had a question. Earlier, there were some statistics up there about college reported sexual assault. Was it 1 in 4? Or half
Reported,
assault
I think it
occurs?
was about 10% actually report.
Okay, so
but 1 in 4
90%.
are sexually assaulted while they're in college.
So
For women.
if you put those two numbers together, does that mean 2 out of 4? If 90% are unreported?
These are projected estimates, and there's a lot of studies that are done on people, on populations more broadly, including asking what they've experienced and what they've reported. And these statistics they're repeated in a lot of different studies nationally. And so when we say 1 in 4 women, that's what we understand to be the experience. For example, what you would see at UCSC, if we looked at that number of people experiencing sexual violence, and then the Cleary report just came out, and they had 10 or 11 reported on campus in the last year.
Okay, so that's way underreported.
Way underreported.
It'd be more like 1 in 40 students if you look at the 1 in 4 and then you 10% of that.
Have you seen the numbers change over time with the work you guys have been doing or anything? Or is it too big
We had seen in our office a huge spike. So the reports went from like 80 and now we're about 400, so about 5 times as much. But last year, I would say we had kind of a parallel to the year before, so it kind of like spiked up dramatically. Now it seems to be ebbing.
But that's for
Title IX.
For broader definitions, not just sexual assault.
Yeah.
So for broader definitions of things that fall within the purview of Title IX.
And just to be clear, we don't think that it's happening more. We think people aren't reporting.
Yeah.
What are the consequences, say for that scenario that you put up there? What would happen in that scenario?
That would be for just the sexual assault penetration, 2-year minimum suspension, and then for the aggravating circumstances, if they felt that the person had provided alcohol with the intent, that could be another year or dismissal. It sort of depends. The way we do it on our campus is Title IX will make a recommendation on the policy violation, and student conduct will issue the sanctions. That way it feels, and then they also have both parties have the opportunity to appeal.
And does that also go to local police?
If they want to report.
Okay.
But it would be a Clary report, so we would have to report to that number if it was on campus. Just so people are aware, and that would not be without any information about the parties.
It's up to the
Unless they
survivor
chose
if they choose to engage in a criminal justice process as well, either or both.
I was a little confused about, is it 2 years or something, the sanctions last?
It would be, so a student for sexual assault penetration has a minimum of 2 years suspension, and then you can add on another year or more depending on circumstances. Did you?
Yeah, I was just curious, and I was glad you asked about consequences. I was wondering the same thing. Like, a woman comes to you and says, this thing happened. Maybe she may or may not know what she wants to do. Would it be a possibility to have mediation and education for both parties involved if she felt okay with that? And it's not strictly punitive, because then people might not want to report. Like, I still really like this guy. I want to work it out. Can you help them in that case without?
Yeah, and that would be considered alternative resolution. So depending on how the person wants it to be resolved. Some people want a formalized alternative resolution where it's a signed agreement. Sometimes people just want us, depending on the level, to like talk to the parties and say, this is what happened, this is how it impacted me. It can be a whole wide range. Mediation isn't super commonly recommended though with sexual assault. Especially like people talk about restorative justice, but in order for restorative justice to happen, you have to admit to wrongdoing. Now, if someone admits to having done it, then now they're subject to the policy if that person changes their mind. So that part can be a difficult piece to navigate, but sometimes we can have conversations with just letting people know this isn't, we're not asking questions, we're here to really just talk to you about things. And sometimes that's what they want. Especially with sexual assault contact. I think with the penetration, it's a lot more emotionally charged, and But a lot of times people go to Kelsey's office, work with care, and they don't want to report at all as well. So it's, everyone lands somewhere on the spectrum. And then some people go to police first and may not even want to.
Do you think that provides a shield for perpetrators on campus, that it isn't automatically reported to the police? You know what I mean? If it was out in
I
public
think
at
people
large.
would report less if they felt like if it came to Title IX, it was going to go to police. Or they would report less. So we have a confidential options on our campus, which is care and then counseling, so that people aren't going to be scared to talk to somebody. We don't want to make people feel like they can't talk to anyone, or else it's going to, they're going to get a report, because people, they've already had their power taken away from them. So
Sure.
yeah. So I mean, I can't say that's not true, but I think that the flip problem is more significant and problematic.
So we have only got 5 minutes. I want to, these are really good questions. We'll be available afterwards, but I want to revisit the case study. And so in that case study, what would it mean to give and receive affirmative consent?
Like what could have been said?
Would you like to do blah, blah, blah? Basic asking permission, right? Or asking
Yeah.
interest.
Asking if they know what
it is.
and showing.
Oh yeah. So clarifying, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Some people want to have sex. Is that what you want to?
Yeah, and not only in that pretext, because maybe in that moment they might want it, but when it's about to happen as well. Because unfortunately, I've seen situations too where people agree to sex, on Facebook, and they meet, and it was a really sad case, and the young girl changed her mind when it happened, and then when they were together, and then the student was like, well, you already gave me permission, so they felt like they had the right. So that's where that revocable piece is really, really important, because it might seem fine until it's actually happening, and then you might change their mind. But when we ask students that question, people are scared to say anything. They don't have the language. It's not in the movies. In the movies, they want to kiss you, and you kiss them, right? You know it, and that's what we learn.
You just kiss them and hope for the best, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
So I get this especially from my family a lot. Like, do you want to have sex? Like, who's actually going to say that? And in that way, like that takes all of the romance out of it. That's not sexy at all. I think that the youth are really developing a lot more language around this. I see healthy relationships where young people are bringing this language into their relationships, and it is possible, and it doesn't have to sound so like textbook, right? So there's some great examples here in this graphic. Does this feel good? Do you like this? What do you want me to do? Is it okay if I try? If I change my mind, we'll stop. I liked that last time, but right now I'm not in the mood. And so we can develop a whole vocabulary around giving and receiving affirmative consent.
I like to think it actually improves the sexual experience when you can communicate with your partner and find out what they like and don't like.
Right. You want, ultimately, you really want the best sexual experience for both parties, right? And if you can have some communication and normalize that communication between each other, ultimately, hopefully that's more sexually gratifying. And it's okay to talk about these things with youth in our community. Yeah.
One thing I said to my son, and of course he gets all embarrassed when I talk about this stuff.
Of course.
But I said, if you can't talk about it, then you're not ready for it.
Yeah.
Is what I said.
I like that.
I say that too to the college students.
Good.
So I think there's also ways that we as the community, as parents, as mentors, as neighbors, as friends, as citizens can normalize a culture of consent and create social expectations for one another about affirmative consent outside of the bedroom. And normalize that consent, not the violence. So these are things like asking for permission, asking someone before you hug them or touch them in non-sexual ways. And I see that on campus all the time, and it just makes my heart flutter. I just really feel like giving you a hug. Is that okay? Asking before you take pictures of people or post pictures on social media. Respecting people's privacy in that way. And respecting their choice. Getting input from everyone before you make like group decisions. Respecting boundaries when someone says no. We definitely, I'm sure you all know, have a culture of peer pressure. Oh, come on, I know you want that brownie, just treat yourself. Instead of like respecting that someone said, no, I don't want it. Don't share personal information. Allow people to own their own stories and choose how they share that information with the world. Checking in before you give somebody's phone number to a new contact. Things like that. Don't force a discussion that someone doesn't want to have. When someone says, I can't talk about that right now. I'm not in a space to have that conversation. Or maybe it's not so direct. Maybe that's communicated indirectly. Pick up on those cues and don't force a conversation that someone's not in a space to have.
To not take it personally.
Yeah.
Not
Yes.
like, oh, you don't want to talk about it, you must be doing something against me. It's like, oh no, it's about you. It's not, that.
Exactly. And I think that that's another piece of teaching affirmative consent that we all need to work on is exactly that, is accepting a no. And really, what does that mean? What does my response say about my ability to respect that boundary? Yeah.
I just think on a bigger level too, that we really need to like not do things to children against their will.
Yes.
And not, like for example, circumcision. I feel like even though I know it's culturally, part of cultures, it's also, I think, for children not to have the consent. They can't get consent to surgery.
Right.
Whether it's that or, and so as much as possible, empowering children, asking them permission. Giving them, power to over their own bodies and things. I think
And
that
they're really young.
I think the circumcision thing is a big wound for a lot of men, who have that force on them. They're tied to a board, and so then that sets them up. Those early traumas that we're talking about, like the trauma of mobility, where you're just frozen. How many children, as babies, were so powerless, right? So the more you have those early traumas, the more likely they are to get active later on, or for women or whoever, they can be powerless. So
that's a really good point, and there are a lot of other ways that we reinforce, especially for little girls, that they are in control of their own bodies. Things like when a child doesn't want to hug their uncle goodbye, and we teach them to do it anyway to be pleasing. Even things like teaching kids that if a boy picks on you on the playground, it means he likes you. That's normalizing violence in preschoolers.
And at first one I think is hard because there's a lot of family pressure. I know I had my youngest daughter she just has never been comfortable hugging family members, and family members would take it really personally. So then working with that child to figure out a way that they can be respectful and interactive with the family person, whether it's like giving them a high five or just going up and talking to them saying thank you so much and it was nice to see you, not just like avoiding that interaction so that they're still interacting with the person but they're not having a physical space.
And also talking to the adults in that scenario about respecting that child's choice and decisions about their own body.
And just the fact that you're having that conversation is powerful, right? We're talking about it. So you're not comfortable with this. How can we make this work? You shouldn't have to kiss your uncle if you don't want to. But at the same time, this is my brother and I love him and I want you to show him respect and I want you to connect. How can we figure out a good way to do it?
So I think the responsibility is really on all of us to change the culture.
Got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. But I think that in a lot of ways, young people, especially those who are getting this kind of education, at younger ages before they're coming into the college setting are really setting a tone. And if we can empower them to have those conversations with their peers and be upstanders with one another as well, and creating a culture of sex health in the bedroom in our society. Yeah.
It's a quick question. You probably already handled the bystander intervention teaching too, right?
Yeah.
That's part of it. What you do.
In terms of today or in terms of
what you do at the university?
Definitely, there's a lot of bystander intervention training. And we have great reports related to students stepping up and keeping each other safe and taking each other home and not letting or taking someone out of the room. We get multiple reports every year of people engaging in upstanding behavior.
Any other questions?
I have 1,000 stickers, and anyone wants to take them?
I love the sticker. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.